if in these first few minutes our two fifth years would like to introduce themselves, feel free.
I'm Hannah. I'm one of the fifth-year students. I used to be on the board, but I'm not. But I always like coming to the events or doing stuff because it's nice.
I'm Meg. I am a fifth-year architecture student. I was vice president of AIAS last year, and I just really like being involved with the AIAS and what it provides opportunities to students for. So
we do have some questions we will be asking, and then if you guys want to show off your portfolios a bit and kind of walk us through some of your own design that you guys have used in your portfolios and how you kind of made those design choices.
Hello, I'm Amy. I'm a fifth year. I don't know what we were saying.
it was just introduction.
Okay, so I just finished an internship this summer at DLR, and last summer I worked at International Architects Atelier in Kansas City, and then I went to Turkey and I worked with Professor Bill Stinson from the Classics Department to do like architectural documentation work there, which also required a portfolio that was a little bit different. So I think we kind of wanted to hear like where you guys are at in school and what questions you have just to kind of kick us off. And then we'll go from there.
Awesome. So since it is 6:05, we will go ahead and start it off. I will accept people as they come in or as they request. But I think a great question to kick off this discussion is, what is a portfolio and what all do you put inside it?
Okay, so a portfolio is essentially a collection of the work that you've done that you are showing to a firm. If we're talking specifically like you're applying for an architecture firm, they're probably going to be looking more at like your architecture projects, but those don't have to be like super in depth. At any year, you should start putting your portfolio together as a way to document your work. And they're very personal, so it kind of, there's a lot that's up in the air, and everyone you talk to kind of has different opinions about what that should look like. But I think we have 3 different ideas, kind of similar, but
because like the portfolio is very much like an expression of who you are as a creative design thinker. So you really want to highlight your personal like creative design process and how you kind of come to your ideas, and that will help the firm understand how you think. And that way, if how you think matches up with how they think, it'll be a great match.
You're telling your story graphically through your projects, and you're also telling the story of those projects as like how they make you into a designer and what you've learned from them. I think that that's really a key piece.
Hannah,
Yeah, you guys, they kind of said everything. I was just going to say the same thing. Like, it's very personalized. Like, you may look at other portfolios and kind of look at different ideas, but like in the end, the way you set your portfolio, the layout, the way you know, if you use color, if you decided to do, you know, more monochrome kind of theme, it's up to you, and it's a reflection of how you are as a designer. And you know, a lot of firms look at that as well. They don't just look at the projects, but they look at how you laid it out, and it's like really important.
It's like how you lay out the portfolio shows what you value and what you find most important about the project. So that's kind of like a good rule of thumb. Someone told me, when you're trying to decide what projects and what to highlight, everything that you put in, be prepared to explain. So if you're not too sure about a graphic or a particular part of a project, you don't even necessarily need to include it.
Awesome. Great way to start off. If you guys do have any questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible. I do have a list of questions here though, so we'll go ahead and go off with the next one. A big issue or a big topic right now is 3rd and 4th years are building their own portfolios, but what program would you recommend us using for either specific images or even the whole portfolio layout?
InDesign.
Well, yeah, I was gonna say, if it's for like layout, definitely InDesign, but if it's more for like graphic stuff, so like if you're editing something like of like your renders or drawings, like I would use Photoshop. If it's something like a line issue, definitely Illustrator, but all in all, it kind of all ends up in InDesign.
Yeah, definitely do your work on your graphics in a separate program from InDesign, because when your files get really large, like a portfolio, it can crash. So you want to make sure that you're not building images in InDesign. It's not the best platform for that.
Yeah, definitely.
But InDesign is fantastic in terms of layout. after you kind of figure out like what you want to show, like what kinds of projects you want to include, the first thing that you really need to be doing is figuring out how those would all fit on a grid. So there's ways to include grid lines that don't show up when it's like final printed or anything in InDesign, and then to kind of like set that as a template. What's the word?
This template, master
page,
Yeah.
and apply that to all of your pages so that they are all uniform. There are also ways to do paragraph styles and character styles. So you set a specific like paragraph style, and you can call it whatever you want. And if you apply that to your text, it will all be uniform throughout your whole document. And if you make a change to that style, it'll update all of the text throughout the whole document. So you don't have to go and find every little text box and like change the font or like increase the point size by like 0.2, you know, that kind of thing. When you get like deeper into the weeds a little bit on InDesign, there's a lot of like really great tools to help you. There's a ton of YouTube videos about it. Setting page numbers don't all have to be individual.
Oh yeah, they're not individual text boxes on each page. Pretty much like when you're learning these softwares, Google is your best friend, and literally just outright, how do I create, like, how do I adjust line weight? Like something as basic as that, there's tutorials for everything.
There's definitely, I know there's definitely either like someone has written a question online or definitely a YouTube video. That's kind of how I've learned everything that I need to know about all the programs that I've used. And it just kind of like slowly increase your knowledge and just build up all the skills that you know, and you can use it in all the other programs since they're all Adobe.
Oh, exactly.
Also, feel free to like reach out to upperclassmen. I know we feel a little bit less accessible now that we're like not all this together, but there are ways to do things like specific, to specific programs that like you would just never think about if you haven't used it before, and it can save a lot of time.
Oh yeah. And we have like the AIAS group chat. Like honestly, you can just throw it in there. Like, hey, I'm in InDesign and I don't have to do a drop shadow or whatever. Like, just reach out on there. We're all here. We're all here to help. But in regard to graphics, I do want to specify one thing. Like Hannah touched on a little bit, renderings and images, great in Photoshop. If you're going to do diagrams or anything that involves a lot of lines, please use Illustrator because it'll save it as a vector rather than a pixel. So when you increase the size, like especially on diagrams and stuff, when you increase the size, it doesn't pixelate it. It keeps it as a line. So that is very important because crisp looking images, like people are like architecture firms are going to notice if like your diagrams is a little pixelated because it was created in Photoshop rather than Illustrator and it was like scaled. That's just a little tip.
I would also hesitate against or warn against putting Photoshop files or Illustrator files directly into an InDesign document. I would save those as a high quality graphic, whether that's a JPEG or a PNG, depending on the situation, because that will make your InDesign file so ginormous. So really kind of to trim that fat, that those should always be images, and then package your InDesign documents frequently so that you don't lose those links.
Yeah.
Is everyone familiar with how InDesign links things? No? Some know, some yeah. Okay, so the images that you're putting into an InDesign document aren't like,
they're not actually in the document.
so it's not like a Word document where like if you save the document and then you go and delete that from your desktop, that the photo is still there. It is referencing the file path for how all of those images got put in. So if you dragged it from your desktop and then saved it to a new folder on your computer, InDesign's going to be like, where did the file go? And you can like right-click, relink, and then search through your documents. But if you package it, it creates a folder wherever you're saving it with a subfolder with all of those links in it, and then it won't pull from the original location. It'll just pull from that folder. So that eliminates the need, or that eliminates the stress of like losing a link and trying to print your portfolio at the last minute and all that kind of stuff.
Which package is right under, like, I think it's the file tab and it's closer to the bottom and it's just package, and it'll save your InDesign file, and then it'll save a PDF version of your file, and then also saving like all of your fonts and your links so that it's easily transferable from like your computer to a USB to a different computer. So you can have everything in one little file and you'll never lose it. Like if you just put it into the InDesign folder, and then like, let's say you put it on a USB and then you just put it in a new computer, it's not going to find those links. And so if you try to print it, it won't let you print because the photos are just not there. The little handy dandy tip.
We just went off.
Using InDesign for a very long time.
No, that's awesome. I love all of those tips. So taking some questions from the chat, thoughts on cover page, and more specifically, what all do you put on a cover page?
I'd say the only thing that's absolutely required is your name. That should be very clear and very legible. It should be your portfolio. It should tell your story. Kind of going off that, like for me personally, my cover page is a really like loose sketch that I did when I studied abroad with like little annotations on it. That I think represents
very representative of you.
Yeah, it represents how I like see the world, how I do things graphically, and it kind of blends in with like the gray theme that I got going. I've seen other successful things be, again, other sketches that you do, anything that shows like your physical hand, I think says a lot about a person. Photographs that you take, please don't put a photo or an image that someone else does. We've seen that.
It's not good.
It should definitely be something that's personal to you.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I know that I had trouble when I did my portfolio. I had trouble like figuring out what to do for the cover page. And then I ended up kind of just putting in a sketch, a really simple sketch that I did study abroad. And it also just fit the rest of the theme of my sketch, my portfolio. So that's also important. Like whatever you do on the cover page should fit the rest of the theme that you have throughout your portfolio.
And I've seen people like create logos for themselves and put that on their cover, or even just like if you find a font that you really like, you can honestly just put your name in a fun font that you really like in like architectural portfolio. So
if you want additional text, I've seen like academic portfolio, like selected works. Sometimes they include a year on that. Sometimes like the University of Kansas or like architecture portfolio, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the big thing is your name. That should be extremely legible.
Yes. That should be, I mean, if you put a sketch, that obviously will catch someone's attention. But so the first thing should be the sketch or the logo or something. And then immediately next, they should read your name.
I think scale and white space are also very important on the cover.
You definitely don't want to be too busy that they don't know where to look. You want it to be very, like Annie said, very legible.
Awesome. Moving on to the next question. So obviously it depends per individual, but in general, how many projects is too many to include in a portfolio?
I mean, I think it's less about the amount of projects. It's more about what you cover within those projects, if that makes any sense. The amount of projects doesn't relate to the quality of the portfolio. So if you have like 7 or 8 projects that you include in your portfolio, but they're very surface level, like in depth into them, that doesn't show much about who you are as a designer. But even if you just do like 2 or 3, I've seen some amazing portfolios that literally just have 2 projects in them. But because they go into such great detail about what they did and their process is very detailed, I think that's a great way to do it too. And it's also like when you're a second year, you don't have a whole lot of projects to display. So you kind of want to, at the beginning, show more projects. And then as you take more studios and you get more projects, you kind of like trim the fat of some projects that aren't maybe as good and replace them with better projects. So I think I have 5 projects in my portfolio currently, and I've taken 9 studios.
I also think it's important to put like, I know that anytime like I was talking or being interviewed by someone at a firm, like, oh, which one's your favorite project? So you should always kind of put that one probably in the beginning, because they're always going to ask you which one out of these is your favorite and why. And then just kind of like go into depth with that.
I think that the baseline is like, don't put a project in your portfolio that you wouldn't want to have a conversation with a professional about. I have also been in interviews where they pick out one thing and they want to talk to you about it for an hour. So if you can't talk about your project, don't put it in your portfolio. Your portfolio is really like a tool to show like what you can do and what you value. And if the projects that you're putting in there aren't representative of that, it's better to have fewer projects.
I know that doesn't directly answer your question. So as long as, I mean, you don't want a portfolio that's 80 pages long. No professional is going to look at that. But like, I think the sweet spot, like for when you get into upper level, it's like 40 to 50 pages. So, I mean, depending on how in depth you go for each one, you don't want it to be like this, it's going to be a very large file if it's 80 pages long. But
again, it is about curating. So some of those pages may have one image on them. You may have a spread that goes across 2 pages that's one image or 2 images. Yeah, it's just more like thinking about like how you want to present the work that you've done. Again, that's not helpful.
Portfolios are not an exact
so
science.
Personal,
yes,
yeah.
It's all very subjective. You just want to make sure that everything you're putting in there, you're willing to talk about for 30 minutes. Because like Annie said, you could have, I've been in an interview where they like open my portfolio and they shut it and they're like, we want to talk about you. But then there's other ones that will literally pick one drawing out and want to talk about that one drawing for 30 minutes.
Kind of building off of that a little bit, looking into different firms, are there certain things you maybe have experienced yourself or have heard about with specific types of firms preferring to see certain things in portfolios? For example, if the firm is a different size or maybe they have different focuses that they are into.
I keep saying this, but as your portfolio is like symbolic of who you are, it's also going to speak to the firms that share like your design beliefs and your values. So I think personally for me, like my look is a little bit more like curated and like toned down, but also very like introspective. And so the firms that I have been invited to interview with and have eventually interned with really appreciate like that thought, whereas some other firms who are looking for different things, maybe they want an intern who is going to be more technical. So they'd love to see more thought about like how things go together and like more technical drawings, details, that kind of thing. When I applied to go to Turkey, it was looking more at drawing and like information drawing. And so I actually like the portfolio that I used to apply for that is not the portfolio I used to apply for an architecture firm. So if you're looking at that kind of thing, like having multiple iterations, multiple versions of your portfolio tailored to who you're applying for are extremely important. I didn't need to include all of my architecture projects in that, but I did need to include a lot more drawing and like digital drawing and hand drawing. Some people will tell you to have a different portfolio for every firm that you apply to. I think that is a little bit unreasonable, but aligning your strengths with the strengths of the firm and making sure that you communicate that in your portfolio is key.
That's what, in some, like most people will just take like on like an issue link to look at your portfolio, but some firms will say we want a like 5 to 7 page selected works. And that's when you can really like go to their website, figure out who they are as a firm, and then kind of like cater your content to like what they kind of offer and their values, and you're more likely to get an interview.
All right. Next question we have, when designing for a specific project, how many words do you usually put in with that project, and what kind of pictures do you try and highlight?
Are you talking about like in the portfolio when you put that project in the description?
So when someone is flipping through a specific project, what's kind of the words to picture ratio, and what specifically kind of pictures are we looking for? Are we looking for all renderings, kind of partie models? What is kind of the ideal range?
Most likely, the bulk of your text is going to be like an introduction to each project. And when I say bulk, I mean like 1 or 2 short paragraphs, kind of at the beginning explaining what the project is, the intent of the project. And then, so that's how I usually, like my first paragraph is introducing the project, what we're doing, what it's for. And then like the second short paragraph is like things that I thought were important. And that's how it inferred my design process. So it's kind of like when you do a project and you get a project brief, it's kind of like a combination of that and then also how you approached it, I guess. But just like in a presentation, in any presentation, you're not going to have a whole lot of text. You'll have like descriptions and like, what do you call it? Captions explaining what the drawings are, but you're not going to have, like, you really don't want a lot of text. You want more images than you want text.
And also in terms of like what kind of images, I think it's good to have kind of like a little bit of everything. I mean, you can probably have everything in the whole portfolio. Like maybe this project doesn't have this certain kind of rendering, but the other project does, just to show your range. But I do also think it's important that you show it kind of like as a story. So it's like a little storytelling. So when you're flipping through it, it's not like it's a render and all of a sudden it's your floor plan and then the site plan. It's like, so you kind of see it consistently just as you describe it. That's how you should also show it.
I would also say even like start back with like a sketch or a diagram or how you started conceptualizing the final result, that they're more interested in how you got from point A to point B than what point B is. I have been in the situation where I put like a cool rendering in the front or something of a project, and then I was trying to explain it in real time, and I had to keep like flipping back and forth because I didn't organize it in a way to allow me to tell that story. So a thing that I have started doing that's very helpful is to like literally sit down as you're putting it together and like say out loud like what you would say for each page and why it makes sense that this is adjacent to this but not adjacent to that and that kind of thing. I do think every image should have some sort of little like caption, title, whatever. Sometimes people find it helpful to say like what programs they use to create that image to like show skills. Sometimes not. It depends on the person. But like they're not going to be as familiar with your project as you will be. And I hate to say it, people flip through portfolios pretty fast. If they have a question about an image, they're going to stop and look at that, but they're not probably going to like go back and try to figure it out. I had a couple of professionals tell me that they probably spend about 60 seconds looking at a portfolio before they decide if they're interested in having you come in and interview and come in and talk about it.
And like we've said, it's different for every firm. So a smaller firm may not have as many applicants, so they may spend more time kind of delving through that. But if you're applying to a bigger, like almost maybe corporate-ish firm, they're probably going to spend like 10 to 15 seconds flipping through it.
But that doesn't mean that every moment should be designed. It should be thought out. And I think that when that happens, that overall it communicates like a very put together professional type attitude, and it like shows off your work really well. So it takes what you've already done essentially and puts it on a nice little platter for them to digest.
Yeah.
So you mentioned storytelling briefly. Can you elaborate a little bit more on what you mean by storytelling and maybe some techniques that you've seen or even use yourself for storytelling?
So again, I often sit down and like say I sound like an idiot when I'm talking to myself. But to like imagine you're introducing a project to a firm who is not familiar with the project. They didn't come and see it at any point in the semester when you were working on it. Maybe it's even been a couple of years since you worked on it. If you sit down with your images and you start to lay them out, and you're going to say, well, I looked at the site first, and like the site really informed what I was doing. A site plan would make a lot of sense to go at the beginning. Or perhaps you started with a form and you have like a sketch of a form, or I want to say like put a ton of precedent images in your portfolio because those can be really easy to be mistaken for your work. But something similar to that, to like start to think about how, like, what did your process look like? Like how did you get to where you are? How did you get to the final project? And then what were the steps in between that? And how can you use your produced graphics to explain those? So technically you shouldn't need to sit down and explain your portfolio to people, but
people need clarification sometimes. I like to kind of set mine out kind of in the way that we designed it. So oftentimes I'll start with a basic sketch, and that's usually like my first image. And then I have like our concept diagrams and kind of how I got to the form of the building, those kind of things. And then like whether you design in plan or section or 3D, maybe go into those. And then to start doing like your kind of, not construction documents, what are they called? Technical drawings of like floor plans, sections, renderings, those kind of things, maybe more towards the end, because that's kind of how like the natural progression of how you did what you did. But then again, there's exceptions for every project. Like the project that we just did last spring, we pretty much were in 3D modeling like right away. And so it doesn't make sense to like start out with the plans and sections because we didn't do a whole lot in that. We just did like a bunch of Rhino modeling and things like that.
The way that I think of it is like kind of like Annie said, like when you're sitting down talking to someone, you don't want to be like flipping back to this page and then flipping back to the other. You should just kind of be flipping through it kind of like gracefully in a way as you're telling like your thought process of how you got from point A to point B.
Another one, for some of us, we are just starting a group project, whether it's design build or maybe a studio project. How do we integrate those into our portfolios? And what are your tips you'd have for ones who do want to introduce that into their portfolio?
Is Hannah, you should talk about, since you did the design, not just the build portion.
Oh, me? For the design build, yeah. So yeah, for the design build, I had Chad Kraus. We did the Noon Maker classrooms, and we were in that studio basically for a full year. Annie and Meg came in second semester with the construction process. The way that I set it up in my portfolio is when I did the introductory paragraph, I mentioned this is a design build studio. This was, as a whole of a class, we designed this together and split the work, during construction documents and such. And when I introduced a drawing that was done by my classmate, I gave them the credit. I put drawn by, for example, drawn by Meg Strayer in the portfolio, so they know that that technically was not my drawing, but I had contributed to the design work. As for, we also, like last spring, we did a partner project. I still have not yet incorporated it into my portfolio, but with that one in sense, like that one was much more like, just because it was like the two of us, it's easier to kind of just like put it in your portfolio, but definitely in the description, like mentioned, this was a partner project. Not all drawings were made by myself. It was a collaborative sort of thing. We kind of both worked on it, but definitely if you put somebody else's work in your portfolio, give them the credit.
And that's also important because a lot of times if you have multiple people in your studio, so you've all worked on one graphic and you have multiple people in your studio applying to the same firm, if the firm sees that graphic multiple times over, they'll get a little confused on who actually made it. So that's a key thing to do.
And it's very similar to how the profession works. Like, you're not going to work alone on a project in a firm. That's never going to happen ever. And even if somehow it did, you'd still be working with engineers, and like, it's not a solitary profession. So understanding how to navigate that as a student, I think, is really important. And if you have, let's say, a detail in your portfolio and you get asked to talk about it and you can't talk about it, that's going to reflect really poorly on you. And honestly, the whole studio.
Yeah.
So if you put something in your portfolio, like, obviously you can utilize graphics that like you didn't make in order to tell the story of the project, but you also need to be telling like the story of what you did on that project. For example, we all were in the same design build, and Meg and I came in after study abroad, so we weren't there the first half of the year, but we came in and we did this additional lectern. So that's really highlighted in my portfolio. Or so I came in and I jumped on as one of the studio coordinators. So I did a lot with like the schedule and individual people's schedules and how those all align. So I actually have like spreadsheets in my portfolio because that's what I did for the project, and it's important to be able to talk about that. And some people think that they're great and some people don't, but that's what I did. So
definitely, like, they're going to want to know. So if you do work on a group project, that's going to be one of the next questions that comes out of their mouths is, what did you do? What did you contribute? Like, they're going to want to know that, and you're going to need to be able to show that graphically and also to talk about it.
I think also incorporating, like, as we specifically talk about design build, like construction photos.
Oh, yes. Process photos.
Photos that you're in, photos that you've taken, that those make it pretty clear to a firm that like this was not something you did on your own, and to have a sort of like final result that's a built project. And nice photos of those, like, clearly you didn't build that by yourself.
Yeah.
It's less complicated than we're making it.
Yeah. Like, I know it's kind of difficult sometimes because you feel like you're not really doing a whole lot of design work on your own. But like we've said before, don't hesitate to put other people's, like, if it's a group project, even if you didn't do the graphic, you can still put it in if it helps tell your story.
Awesome. So turning over to maybe some other things you might put in your portfolio. Are there any things that you would recommend putting in outside of architecture into your portfolio? And more specifically, would you recommend putting a resume at the beginning of your portfolio?
I would definitely put a resume at the beginning of your portfolio, because that's, especially like when firms like open up your portfolio and look at it, that's the first thing they want, like, they want to see like your experiences, where you're at, your achievements.
And also, a lot of times you submit them both. But like, if they print them out, they can lose your resume, but still have your portfolio. So you want to make sure that they have access to that still.
And also, don't forget to put your contact information in your portfolio, even if your resume is not formatted exactly the same it is on your paper resume. Like, you want to be sure that they can contact you. I also found it helpful to put like, I think a LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, I have my LinkedIn, my cell phone, email.
You want to make it so easy for them. You don't want them to have to dig for anything. If they're like, I want to talk to this person, you want to make that very easy. In terms of other things, any sort of design work, design thinking, it can be super theoretical. It can be graphic design. It could be furniture design. I have some photography in my portfolio. I think a lot of people do. I would just make sure that like you can talk about why it's there, like why it's important to you.
Yes.
How it makes you see the built environment different.
Yeah. That's, I feel like photography is kind of hard. It's a little bit more subjective. And so you need to make sure that there's like a good solid reason as to why you're incorporating that.
If you have a photo that like you can't show to a friend and have them be like, yes, that's a good photograph, like that's well thought out, that shows an eye for design, I would not put it in. The same thing for sketches. If it's a sketch that you're not proud of, I would not put it in. A lot of people do have like hand drawing, sketching, painting, also digital sketching, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I have a whole graphic design portion. I do a lot of graphic design, and they like to see those outside interests. Because that was actually a talking point I had with one of the firms that I had an interview with. They were like, "Oh, we see you like graphic design. Like, tell me more about that." And I was just talking about one thing led to another, and they're like, "You would really fit in well with our like, I don't know, interior experience studio or something like that, where they work on like branding spaces." And I was like, "Well, that's really cool." And that was all because I just included my graphic design work to show that I do have other interests outside of or outside of architecture and how they kind of influence each other.
I've seen some sculpture, metalworking, anything that's like creative. I think that there's a way to put that in there.
Definitely.
So starting to look at layouts and some of that space, how do you go about finding the right amount of white space or finding how many items belong on a page without making it seem too cluttered?
Well, for the layout, it's really important that you have the sort of grid going the entire portfolio. I know that was something I struggled with when I first started doing my portfolio a couple years ago. And then as I like learned, I was like, okay, well, there needs to be like a strict sort of structure that's consistent throughout the entire portfolio. As for, I feel like white space and white space and stuff, I know that like, I feel like you don't want to have too much on the page, whereas that way it'll get lost in the meaning. Because I think the white space is really important, kind of zeroes in on like the image that you're trying to express in that sort of portion of your portfolio.
Yeah. And like when you have a bunch of images that you want to put on the same page, it's going to be clear like, oh, these two belong together because they form each other. So maybe you don't need anything else on that page except for those two drawings. So it's kind of more of like a balance between personal taste, but also like keeping relevant images together and not forcing a bunch of stuff on one page, essentially.
Image hierarchy.
Yeah. If you like look at a page and you don't know where to look on the page, that's probably a good sign that there's too much. And you may want to like rethink some of the layouts. But the grid is your best friend. You can apply grid lines to master pages, so you don't have to hand apply them to every page. And I have, I think, like a couple different formats of masters. So I have like an introduction page to a project master, and then I have like an intermediary master for the pages that just house drawings, and I have a title page and a contents master, and like you can have a bunch of different a bunch of different templates and grids that all match each other but aren't exactly the same. So you're not forced to like this rigid grid. It's a little bit more flexible.
All right, our final question before we kind of put you guys even more on the spot with presenting your portfolios. Are there any final tips that you really wish someone would have told you when you started making your portfolio? Or are there any things that we should avoid when making our portfolio, or that you would recommend just not practicing?
You just gotta do it. Once you like sit down and figure out how it all goes together, it's a lot easier to then continue to iterate on that. Additionally, you can talk to so many people about your portfolio. Professors will review it for you. If you make any contacts at a firm, they would usually happily review your portfolio, but everyone's going to have their own thoughts and opinions about what should be in it, what should not be in it. Kind of take that with a grain of salt. I think when I first started showing it to people, I was getting all of these different reactions, and it was really stressful for me to figure out how those all went together, and the answer is that they don't. So to stay true to who you are and what you want to say, and then the rest it'll kind of fall into place.
And I don't know how they're going to be conducted this year, but go to mock interviews, go to portfolio review nights, do all of that stuff so you can get multiple different opinions on your work. And you can also figure out for yourself, oh, this firm said this about my portfolio, and I feel like that really resonated with how I think as a designer, and so maybe I want to work for them. And then you can experience the exact opposite with another firm, and you're like, I don't want to work with them because they don't value this aspect of the design process or something like that. And don't be afraid of people not liking it. And I don't know how to explain that. It doesn't feel great in the moment to have somebody tear apart your portfolio, but it's going to make your portfolio better in the long run.
I also think it's important to know that it's not going to be perfect on the first try. Mine has definitely changed a lot since the first time I made it a couple of years ago. It's completely different. But until you get your kind of theme and the layout perfect, it's gonna take a couple of tries. And especially just consulting professors, consulting your peers and all that, just kind of get people's opinions, because another set of eyes can always help. When you're looking at it too long, it won't register with you.
Also, it's never done.
That's true. It's never done. I still don't have mine done.
Also, just a note about printing portfolios, because I think that doesn't get talked about very much. But in my opinion, you should have a digital version. It's really easy to send as an issue link. ISSUU.com. It's free. I think most fifth years at this point have their portfolio from the winter uploaded, because we had to for fifth year placements and things. You can Google them. They pop up, and you can look through people's. There's people's from other schools. There's all sorts of creative things on issue. It's a great platform in general. But in terms of printing, I have found it easier to do 8.5 by 11 vertical, because it prints onto an 11 by 17 inch page, and then you can fold it. I always go to CopyCo. They're just right out on 6th.
Yeah,
I think.
Yeah, 6th. They moved.
And I found that they're a very reasonably priced option to print it. I also am a person who likes a lot of white space, and I don't necessarily like it to be glossy. So if you kind of continue to explore your different options with printing, but if you go to an in-person interview, you should have physical copies, and I would promote the idea of having physical copies for everyone in the room. So if you know how many people you're going to be interviewing with, if it's 3, you might need 3 copies. Don't need to print 8. They're kind of expensive. But bring a physical portfolio to a physical interview.
And if you don't like the portrait 11 by, or 8.5 by 11, mine is 11 by 17 horizontal. It's not great for printing because
horizontal.
It's 8.5 by 11. Sorry. But every page has to be printed on an individual piece of paper, so it is almost twice as expensive. But I prefer that landscape and that orientation, so I'm willing to pay more money for it. So it's all personal style. I would recommend to do 8.5 by 11, whether it's horizontal or vertical. A lot of people like to do square portfolios or half size portfolios. They get lost pretty easily if they don't fit in with a bunch of standard size papers. So just for logistics.
I think the square can be well done if it's 8.5 by 8.5. I would hesitate, or I'd caution against anything larger than 8.5 by 11, because it's not going to fit nicely anywhere.
Not larger than 8.5 by 11, and probably not skinnier or smaller.
Some people will do a portfolio website type thing instead of a digital portfolio. That can be good and bad. It depends on how you use it, how You use it as a tool instead of like allowing the website to design everything for you. And then also when you're printing, be aware of bleeds. Those are a little bit confusing. There are also YouTube videos that help explain those better than I can. But that's just like how close to the edge of the page it'll print. And oftentimes you will need to like trim the page if the printer can't do that. CopyCo helps.
You can also get it done at Jayhawk Inc. They do it portfolios too, and they kind of, what I like about how they do it is if you give them like the cover in the back, they kind of do it in a thicker material so that it shows that that's like the cover.
There are also
That'll
some
save you money.
really great websites online that you can order it online and they'll ship it to you. Just be prepared to build that time into whenever you need it.
Oh yeah, and like I think CopyCo, if they're not busy, I mean, I wouldn't encourage last minute printing, but they can get it done in like half an hour.
It's really quick.
Like 3 of them.
Well, if any of you have your portfolios up and ready, feel free to share the screen. But if not, while you're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and put in one more plug for next week's ARC Hangout. We will be bringing in professionals for a portfolio review. It is going to be a little bit more focused on portfolio design and presentation and not necessarily as much on the projects themselves. And I've made all of the professionals aware of that. So if you want to either see professionals comment on portfolios or even show off your own portfolio, this time next week, same link, you can present it there.
Okay, so this is my cover page. Again, it's like a very loose sketch. It's very interpretive. It was a blind contour drawing in a square in Copenhagen that I literally just took out of my sketchbook. But again, the only thing I have on there is my name. I have the same font and the same colors on my resume, and also the same organization where like the edges of my first name align with the edges of my last name.
Also, having your resume and portfolio match is always good because that way they can like see your portfolio and they'll be like, oh, I remember looking at a resume that was similar to this, and they can kind of connect those two.
This is pretty basic. Some people have a more designed page. Again, it's a lot of white space, but that's kind of my MO. So I have gotten a lot of comments on the way that I name my projects in my table of contents. Just that it shows that I am thinking about all of these as like a place and the people that would go there and that kind of thing. So when I talk about it, I talk more about that. Resume, it's pretty much the same resume I print. There's not a lot of changes. I've gotten both positive and negative reactions to the photo. Some people like it, some people don't. It is
very
what it
personal.
is.
Like, I don't think any firm is going to be like, we're not going to hire her because she has a photo on her resume.
Right, but it does.
But it's more of like a personal
Yeah.
thing and how you want. I don't know.
Yeah, in my opinion, it's just like very representative of me, and so I am not afraid of being tied to that, even if someone doesn't know me.
Because we know somebody who she recently graduated and she doesn't have a photo of herself, but has like a cartoon kind of avatar that she made, and she uses that. And that was pretty cool. It's all about how you want to kind of show yourself.
I'll go pretty quick, so yell at me if I need to stop. So I have a library project from second year. I started with the site and more like diagrams about how moving through that site. So that's where I start with that story. Again, it's like a very small chunk of text. I have a way to distinguish like project from project in my portfolio as you like keep going. Some of these graphics really need to be redone, so please don't judge me.
Yeah, and that's another thing. Like, don't ever be afraid to go back and redo graphics. Like, if you want to show the project, but the graphics don't necessarily are not up to par, you can go back and redo them. No one's telling you can't ever work on those projects again.
Yeah, I need to fix these. This is another second year project. Someone had asked about putting second year projects in there. I still use a lot of mine. I think that it's sometimes easier to show how you think on projects that are slightly less complex. And so those are like the beginning architecture projects that you're doing in like second and third year even. And so that you could sort of have more of an opportunity to show how you think about people and how they're using the spaces rather than like I'm not super interested in detailing buildings. I know that that's part of the job, but that's not what I want to show about myself. Site plans, basic renders. Again, I didn't know I had this many second-year projects. But overall, just focusing on, like, you can tell that the grid is fairly obvious, specifically on this page, and that I'm really prioritizing the white space and allowing the images to stand for themselves. This is our group project. So if there is a professional photographer, make sure you like call that out at the bottom there. And then again, in the description, I think I talk about it more in this description than on the specific images, but how like it was a group project and what your responsibilities were. So again, I didn't do those graphics on the right, I don't think, but I call it out at the beginning. And then these are photos that I'm in. I chose those because it shows a couple of different
tasks that you've done.
Yeah. And then this is my spreadsheet of all. I think that in the future I'd be interested in like project management, so that was really important for me to put in, as well as just showing like how to work with people, how to stay on time, and with that in an architecture firm, as you're charging for your time, that goes to sticking on budget as well. This is our lectern. So again, fitting images that you already have within the grid. This was actually a study of structure. So this is a train station by Calatrava. This we did with Kadeem. But again, focusing on graphics, focusing on like what you can do in certain programs, and how that all goes together. And then contrasting that with something that's completely traditional, hand-drawn, hand-built. And other opportunities that I've had. So these are drawings that I did in Turkey. Yeah.
So like that's a page that you really want to be careful because she has going across the seam of the two pages. So you really, if you're printing it, you want to make sure that those edges are at least going to meet and that nothing is going to be cut when they print.
Right, and to make sure that they're aligned afterwards. And so because it's so large for me, I'm not super worried about losing some of the information in there. It's not critical to the rest of the drawing. You can tell what it is without that. You're not losing any text.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And then it's kind of up for debate whether or not to put professional work in an academic portfolio. I did, just to show that I had some internship experience. I could do both design thinking and render work within a professional environment.
Can you explicitly say academic in your beginning? Okay.
Yeah. But again, before you take any work from a professional office, you are required to talk to them about it and make sure that they're okay with you showing that in your portfolio, using their, like, essentially their work that they have paid you to do to represent yourself is kind of like you need to make sure that you have permission.
Yeah.
And some projects will even be confidential, so you can't. And then I do have some photography as well, mostly from cool places I've been, but also that show like the way that I see buildings specifically, and the things that I notice about them. Oh no. Cool. And like how people use them as well. So, and it's not very much. It's fits the grid. And that's it. So again, I always have more stuff to put in there, but I don't need to. But most of those projects are from like third year, second year, that kind of thing. So don't be afraid of putting those in your portfolio. I will probably take some of them out as I put in work from the past 2 semesters, but I don't have a completed version.
And I mean, it's more about how we said before, like the projects that you want to show kind of who you are as a designer. So like you don't necessarily have to put in every single upper level studio. I really do not like the way that my project turned out for the fall of last year. So I'm not even going to include it in my portfolio. And, you know, if they ask about it, which they did more when I like went for an interview early spring, and they were like, oh, why don't you have your past project in here yet? And I was like, well, it's something that I think I still need to work on before I can talk about it, or something that I feel like it needs more development. And they're not going to be like, oh, well, she's lazy. No, they're going to be like, okay, well, I appreciate that you have kind of vetted that for yourself, that you're like, I'm not ready to present it yet, and I want to work on it more.
So be prepared for questions like, what did you learn during this project? What would you have done differently if you did it today? Like, what changes have you made? Like, what did you gain from the final review? You should be updating them before we put them in your portfolio. Yeah, someone asked me that. It was like, I was actually able to be like, oh, like I made this change in the design, not just in the graphics. And they were very impressed with it, and I got a job because of it, I think. So.
Awesome. Well, that's all the time we really have for this one. We have about 3 minutes left. So if you guys have any closing remarks on portfolios, feel free to say them.
Use issue to your advantage. Like, look at other people's portfolios as inspiration, for sure, if like you're stuck, and just kind of pick from like other people's, like, oh, I kind of like the way they did their layout, I could do something similar. Or, oh, I like how they use the color throughout their portfolio. So definitely use issue to your advantage, not just for publishing, but also to view others' work.
Yeah, definitely.
To show your strengths, I prefer more diagrams and things to large scale renderings. And I think that's pretty obvious when you flip through it.
Yeah.
But
I also don't super enjoy the rendering process. I like the more design process. So I have a lot of diagrams. And I realized I went in for an interview and I had no renderings in my portfolio. And they were like, you know how to use 3D modeling, right? And I was like, oh yeah, like, sorry, I definitely do. I just don't have any renderings in here. But so it is important to kind of show that range. I mean, a lot of firms, if you get hired, like they'll put you through their own Revit training, Rhino training, like whatever. But it is important to know that, like, to show them that you know, like, you have a wide variety of like skill sets and talents. And I often like to bring up that I like to use Rhino personally over SketchUp. A lot of people find that really interesting, and that dives into a conversation about, oh, well, why do you prefer that? And I was like, well, I like it because it forces you to think about every little thing, and not everybody likes that. And so it kind of, in what you highlight delves into who you are as a designer, and that's really important to feature. Oh,
we have one final question before we and I will pull that up really quickly. How did you get interview connections, or did you ever just show up to a firm with your portfolio?
I have heard of people doing that and having success, but I have personally never done that.
I personally really utilized the career fair, and even if like you're not going to interview or if you're not interested in a firm for that specific year, to sort of like start building those connections. And then like when I went back last year, people recognized me, remembered what I'd done. We were able to talk about how I'd grown as a person and as a potential future architect, as a student, that kind of thing. And that was really helpful.
Going, like, I don't know how it's going to look this year, but participating in all events in which any professionals are going to be there, and introducing yourself at the end, or getting a business card and just following up like, hey, I really appreciate you coming out to KU. I enjoyed that you talked about this. And be like, I would appreciate it if maybe you could take a few minutes to look over my portfolio and let me know what you think.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't even necessarily have to be a formal interview application or an application on a website. It can be a very formal but informal, like, hey, how you doing? I liked your talk last week.
Yeah, I have personally not had great success like submitting it cold to a company. It's a lot better when you know someone, whether AIAS firm visits, and I think the most important thing is to follow up with them after you meet them the first time and start to build that relationship. Professors have great connections. They can often point you in the right direction. Upperclassmen ask their opinions on firms. made some decisions from talking to people who have more knowledge about certain firms than I do.
Take advantage. Again, we don't know how it's going to look this year, but take advantage of like the events and all that. Like the mock interviews, they might be mock interviews, but you're still meeting professionals, and you should take it as if you're actually doing an interview, because they're also looking at students on how they present themselves, and they give out business cards that you can still contact them afterwards when you're looking for a job. And the career fair is definitely a good place to start.
Taking leadership in any sort of situation that interacts with professionals. So Joe's professional practice class 3rd year, we were required to go to a firm as a group. And they had originally said that they weren't looking for interns that summer. And then a couple of weeks later, after we had sat down and done our interview with them just for class, and it wasn't related to like our work at all. It was all about their work, like how they operated as a firm. They reached back out and were like, would you want to interview?
I got an interview out of the mock interview. Out of the mock interview night, I got a real interview out of it.
Portfolio night. I got one.
Yeah. So it's all about, that's why your portfolio representing who you are is very important, because if somebody who works at a firm likes what they're seeing and it really resonates with them and how they design and how they think, they're going to be more likely to suggest you to their HR person or to suggest you to come in for an interview.
Yeah, I keep a spreadsheet of most professionals I've met along with notes about what we talked about. So if you don't remember, you could say, oh, we talked about this. I have a follow-up on that. Like I have continued to think about it, and this is what I've learned. Big spreadsheet.
Yeah. And that's also good because it can keep all of that information in one place. So like if you lose the business cards, it's not a big deal because you have record of them somewhere else.
We'll go ahead and end it there. Thank you for all of you who attended and who participated. This will be up on YouTube soon. So if you weren't able to make it, or if you want to reference back to it because you weren't sure what they said, or you didn't take notes on a specific thing, feel free to watch it as well. But thank you for
reach out if you have additional questions, if you want us to help you, anything.
I'm pretty sure all 3 of us are in the AIAS group.
Yeah.
So you can just add us or private message, or we're here.
We're always here.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again to our 5th years for being here. Annie, Megan, Hannah, we appreciate it. But yeah, thank you all, the rest of you, for joining us. We'll go ahead and end the meeting here.
Thank you.
Thank you.